Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss.
Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Ruth.
And I'm Claire, and today we're talking about helping students find the right major. But first, Ruth, how was your week?
My week was great. I'm always late to all of the popular things that are happening, but so I finally discovered a show called Fleabag.
Which see, I'm even later. I don't know this show.
Well, I think it's definitely more of a thing over here, but I just can't. I actually ended up even staying up till 1 a.m. to finish it, and I regret nothing because it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And as my really good friend Jodie described it, the first season is very intense, and then the second is more hopeful. But it's I don't even think I was when you're watching something, you're like, this is great, but then it's it just does not leave you. It really stays with you. So I am now obsessed with the lady who wrote it and starred in it, and she also wrote another show called Killing Eve, which is also amazing, but very different. So that's been my week is
that's cool,
becoming completely obsessed with this person.
What's the basic premise of Fleabag?
Fleabag, it's just sort of it's not going to sound great when I say it, but it's someone who's kind of going through a really tough time with some tragedy that's happened, but it's also hilarious and definitely you wouldn't want to watch it in the same room as your grandparents, because it's a little rude, but it's just so good. And then Killing Eve is about a female assassin, and then this woman in the British Secret Service who's kind of trying to track her down, but it's also very funny, and I can't do it justice. Obviously I did not do justice there, but it's so worth it. It's very good.
That's good. I always that seems like that can be really fun if somebody produces the show and stars in it. It's their vision.
Well, it's funny too. Cool. Sometimes, do you ever feel sometimes you don't want to be emotionally stimulated by something? You just want to watch something really... And I think I've been in that headspace for a long time. And so I had heard about this before, but I was no. I don't. I just need something basic that I can tune out to, But
totally.
I was ready now, and it was worth it. So, yeah. How about you? How was your week?
My week was good. I decided that I'm not doing attendance points anymore. I tried it and decided it's not my thing.
Oh, do tell.
I never used to do attendance points. So for the first several years of teaching my own class, I didn't have them. And I just figured, this is where we're talking about the content. You should be there. If you choose not to be there, hopefully you make up the content in some way. But really, it's your own business kind of thing. And then I was having a little bit of trouble with attendance when I did my active learning worksheet days. And the common recommendation I was getting was, you need to assign some points to them. That needs to be clear that this is something important. If you value the worksheet days enough to make them be your lecture days, they should have some points associated with them. And that makes sense. I didn't really want to assign points to the worksheets because I specifically like that they're just...
Me too.
That they're relaxed, I'm not going to be grading you on them.
Right, and I like when it's exploratory and you're not just tell me the right answer. And
exactly. Yeah. So I didn't want to do that. So then I ended up assigning attendance points instead. But then, I don't know, it's just first of all, then I have to keep track of attendance points. Second of all, I feel like I'm double penalizing people because if they don't come, they're in a worse shape for the class, and then they lose attendance points and the points they lost from not knowing the material.
Wow, you've actually kind of blown my mind just there.
The point, of course, is to encourage them to come. But
if they really can't go...
Right. Or if they aren't going anyway for whatever reason, whether they can or can't, they're... Yeah, I don't know. So I'm not into it. So I decided, tried it, don't like it, done with attendance points.
Wow, okay, cool.
Yeah. So
okay, I want to hear a report back about this. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about the double penalizing.
Yeah.
There's so many. I mean, I guess this is why we have so many episodes of this podcast, but there's so many ways of looking at all of these things that you know what I mean? Because it is if you value it, then make some points towards it. But
Right.
then it's also
That
like,
makes sense.
if it is important to
Right.
them, they should, yeah.
Yeah. Because really, I want them to come to class. I think that's the best strategy for doing well in the class, obviously. And I'll tell them if they're doing poorly and they're not coming to class, the obvious first suggestion I'll make is come to class. But yeah, if they're, I want them to learn the material. That's the overall goal. And
Wow. Okay,
So I
we
don't
might
know.
need to. Maybe this needs to be a whole episode in the future. But yeah,
yeah, I think it's worth thinking about. But anyway, so you have a quote for us today?
I do, and I can you guess what show it might be from?
Oh, it's from Fleabag?
It is from Fleabag. Yes. And so there's a quote I really wanted to do, but I can't because it's a spoiler about the whole thing. So
Oh, okay.
I'm not going to do that one. But this one is from a character just referred to as the priest. But I think universally he's known as the hot priest, which I think so much so that I was really surprised that wasn't what he was credited as in the end of the show. I was like, oh, I thought that was his name, was hot priest. But anyway, so at the end he says, being a romantic takes a hell of a lot of hope. And I think that is true. And I feel like it's also true about our job. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like sometimes like being, I don't know about you, but I certainly have very romantic notions about being a professor. By romance, I do not mean actually having romances, but you know what I mean? Just to clarify. But you know what I mean? Just this like idealism, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it's hard sometimes to hold on to that idealism in the face of being really tired and having a lot of, work and practical things to do. So I think, but it's worth holding on to.
I think that's a great takeaway. It's worth holding on. It's easy to get caught up in the mundane day-to-day of taking attendance points, for example, and forget the overall mission and the overall, the big picture of what is the big thing we're doing here, which is really romantic in
totally.
that
Like,
sense
I
of the
think,
word. Yeah.
right. Like believing that you're going to go and educate people is like very idealistic.
awesome.
And I mean, there's a
I
lot
love
more
it.
pragmatic things. Like if we were just trying to like cash a paycheck.
Right.
Do you know what I
but
mean?
we're-
And so,
yeah, totally.
yeah.
Oh, I love
So I
that.
think-
And that's really good to keep in mind.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely in there for sure. But also everyone should watch Fleabag. And then if all of the listeners report they watched it, then I'll do the other quote another time. 'Cause then it won't be a spoiler. So yeah, sorry.
Okay, good.
Okay, cool. So tell me, what are we talking about today?
So we're talking about helping students find the right major. And we were thinking maybe we could start with just a little bit about how it works. Like what does it mean to find the right major? So like I know at the university that we've both taught at, I think probably most students come in with a major declared, but they might change their major. You can come in with it undeclared. And in general, I would say that whether you come in undeclared or not, it's hard to know what major you want when you just start out in college. And so I think it's very, very normal. And I encourage people to consider it and change majors and, find the one that really matches with what they're interested in and excited about. So I don't know, what can you add to that?
Yeah, and so like I think as I've described on here before, in Ireland it's very different. Like there's this central application system for all of these university courses, and you go in this program. And so there's like positives to that for sure, like in terms of cohort building and everything. But one of the negatives is it's quite difficult to change
I see.
your course. Because say, I don't know, it's so tedious and hard to explain, but like there's a certain number of points you need to get into different courses. So like you can't just necessarily switch over to a different course that would have different points or, all of that kind of thing. And so
And when you say course, do you mean major or class?
Oh, yes, I mean like kind of, because they don't call it a major, but like degree program. So like, if you were to say I'm in physics, that means you are in the physics program with your other physics program students and, that kind of thing. So I think, I don't know if it actually is physically like more difficult, but it feels weightier in a way to switch because you would be leaving behind like all of your classmates and
I see.
And it's something I like a lot about the American system is like, like at up to a certain point, especially for us with physics and chemistry, you're not going to have lost out anything. Really.
Right,
it's
sure.
Not like
you're taking the basic intro classes and they'll apply to lots of other majors if you switch. Totally.
Right. So I think that's helpful for sure.
Yeah,
And if
that makes sense.
because you're a lot more positive than me. So I was like, let's call it like helping students leave their major. And then it's like, no, not quite. But so, yeah.
So, yeah, well, in the context, I mean, sometimes it is leaving our major to go to the right major. So what's working for you with helping students do that?
Well, I years ago, like I facilitated this workshop and everyone was coming up with projects that they were going to kind of carry into their day-to-day teaching or their interactions with students. And one person wanted her project to be helping students leave their major. Like that was, and I was like, wow, that's really negative. But then it wasn't. And it was about this, like she was really reflecting on how people can kind of feel like they've failed, or like some people have this identity, like I'm pre-med from like when they're like 10, and it's so like it's this huge loss of identity. And she really wanted in her role of interacting with students to help that be a positive experience. Like, hooray, you're finding what it is you want to do, and encouraging students to not stay in something they're not happy in, and to
Right.
and that really shifted my thinking about it and trying to like really frame it as a positive move. And I think before that also I would have often had conversations with students where they're like, I don't know if I should do physics, and I'd be like, no, of course you can totally do it. And that's not really the point. And you know, I think also for me a big problem is like knowing when to shut up, you know, and just like not into like, oh no, this is what you should do, and just letting students like talk it out and like, oh, how come you feel that way, or is there something else you're more interested in? And trying to normalize, I guess, that process.
I love it.
So I think, yeah, there is sometimes something with people doing science where it can feel like a practical decision, like a pragmatic thing, like then I can get a good job. But you're not going to if it's something you absolutely struggle with and hate every second of it. Like you're not going to get a great degree, you know. So yeah.
Or even if you do, then you'll be in a job that you don't like.
Yeah, and it's like this is gonna and I think a lot of this came up for me sort of hearing a discussion between students in the lab where this girl clearly wanted to do something else, but then she's like, but I've already done like a year and a half of this course and it would be such a waste. And it's like, oh my God, you have like 2.5 more years to go. Like, I don't think it's that applicable in America, but here there's a real thing of like, if you've waited 40 minutes for a bus, like you have to stay there because then that 40 minutes will have been wasted. Do you know what I mean? And you're like committed now. So it's like, just leave the bus stop, man.
Yeah.
Spend
At this point, the question is it worth waiting for the bus?
Right. So, yeah.
I totally get that. I mean, that's classic sunk cost fallacy, I guess, right?
Yes, that's a much better phrasing. But it's true, right? Where you're like, oh, well, I've already put this much in.
Totally.
And like you said, then it's like, oh, are you going to spend the whole of your life?
Right.
Because of this 1.5 years, you're going to put your whole life on
and
this
that's
path.
that's a good point. Yeah, and I mean, you don't want to have wasted that time. But I guess the way that I'd frame it is you haven't. You spent that time figuring out that this is not the path that you're interested in, and hopefully you are refining your ideas of what you are interested in.
Totally.
And yeah, it'd be a bummer if that took another year to graduate, but at least then you're on a path towards something you want to do, you know?
Totally.
Anyway. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And I think but there is a thing too for like, without this sounds enormously patronizing, but like for 19 or 20-year-olds, a year feels like a real long time. And then for us, it's a bit more like, well, you know, give or take a year is not good. Yeah. So, yeah.
That is true. It definitely, that's a different context. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But maybe that's where we can bring in our old person wisdom, which you're not an old person. But you know what I mean?
Well, compared to the 18-year-olds, yeah.
So what's working for you in this?
Yeah, so I guess the context that I often run into this is with advisees that are coming to me for an advising meeting, and we're talking about what classes they're going to take next semester. And so I look up, well, what did they take last semester? How did they do? And if, sometimes there'll be an advisee who just keeps retaking the classes, because they kept failing or they keep squeaking by. And that's a sign to me that maybe they aren't in a major that they're super excited about. But I guess I want to separate whether it's just that they don't really know how to approach a chemistry class, or if they're not interested in it. So I feel like I like to ask them if they're still feeling like they love chemistry and what drew them to chemistry in the first place and how confident they're feeling that this is the major that they want to have, and just maybe float the idea that they could change if they wanted to. And then, depending on how they respond, if they're like, oh no, I totally love chemistry, I don't really know why I'm having so much trouble because the concepts are awesome, then we can start, now it's a conversation of how do you succeed in a chemistry class, which is a totally different conversation. Or if they're saying, yeah, I thought it was going to be something else than it was, in high school I loved chemistry because we did XYZ, but now here I see that that's just a small part of chemistry, and then it's a conversation of, well, what are you interested? So anyway, I just kind of, I never want a student to feel like they can't do chemistry.
Right.
But I do want them to know that they don't have to choose chemistry if it's not something they're interested in,
I love this. I love like the kind of like stages that you go through with them. Mm-hmm. And something that I'm thinking of too is I've talked to so many students who are like, but I don't want so-and-so to be mad at me. Like literally a professor. And you're like, oh dude, like they're not going to be, but they feel like it's so personal, so it's so cool that you're opening the door to that conversation. Mm-hmm. And cheerfully, not like, well, are you going to leave? But like,
Yeah. It's not that they couldn't cut it in this major.
Right.
It's, like, that's never the thing. If that was the thing, then we'd be figuring out how to make them be able to do it, and it could be getting a study group, or I don't know, there's millions of things you can do. But if they're just not that into it, I mean, that's, I can see why they might feel that they're letting their professors down who are really into it and wanted to teach them this stuff. But really, we want them to be the right match for them.
Totally. And I think there is, honestly, like, I do think there is a bit of a toxic attitude in science that, like, science is, like, harder, I'm doing air quotes over here, than other disciplines. And there's some idea that, like, you know what I mean? And I think that's very embedded. So it's hard to uproot that. But I like this conversation, like the way you frame the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Because you're right. You don't want it to feel like you're taking the easier path because
right.
this was too hard for you. That's not what it is. But no. It can totally feel that way. And
it's just things that you're into.
Exactly.
Easier to study because you're into it. And so,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
So, what are you working on?
Yeah, it's kind of like what you touched on here is the difference between like reality checking and like that conversation, which actually you framed it really well, but also then dream crushing. Do you know what I mean? And when do you, because dude, like when you have, like you said, a student, and I'm thinking of a student like who would even apply to take a class more than the number, like the number of times you're allowed, and
like 4 times or something. Yeah,
and it's like it's not gonna. And sometimes there is just one thing, like Lord knows I cannot do electronics at all. I just never have gotten it. But I'm like, the rest of physics is my thing, but it's like, so it would be a real shame to be like, okay, I couldn't do this one class, so I have to leave for the whole of physics. So there is times when it's just one thing is like tripping someone up, but when it's across the board and it's everything, and but it's so hard. But I like the way you're framing it, and like, are you still excited about it, and what was it you liked at first, and all of that kind of stuff. But I do think, like, this is going to sound really dramatic, but I think there is like a bit of a duty of care to someone to not let them. Like, that word really hit me when you said it, and it's so true. The squeakers, like the people who squeak by. And I think I told you the first year I started teaching, this is not something maybe I should say on a podcast, but anywho, I'm going to say, I definitely felt really sorry for some people, and the squeakers, there was probably a few more who got through. And it was only when I started teaching the next course in the sequence that I was like, oh, I absolutely did not do you a favor. Like, this was a terrible thing I did to you instead. And it's just that feeling, and I've had it in other things in my life where you're just a bit behind, and then you're further behind, and you're further behind. And every time you're just, that gap gets wider and wider and wider. And so, yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like how you bring up the point of it's possible for a student to be really into the major as a whole and really have one class that's just a struggle for some reason. And that would be a case where it's worth trying to find a way to get through that class, even though that
Right.
class is not a good match, because the overall program is a good match and that class is part of the program. That makes sense. And then I guess I was thinking in the context of that, kind of like we were talking about, if they love the major or whatever it is, if they love the major but they're struggling with it, we need to find another approach. So maybe in this case, if the student is doing great most of the time in physics or whatever the major is, but is really having trouble with this one class, maybe that class requires a different way of studying or a different way of approaching the content. And if we could unlock what that is, then it wouldn't just be struggling through with the same tools that aren't working and hopefully eventually getting there with massive effort, but it could instead be, oh, with this class, I don't do my normal things that work great most of the time. I have to do some new things, and here's something I'll try differently. I wonder if we could figure out if there's some pattern like that. Like, I don't know anything about electronics, but is there something totally different? There must be something that makes it different than the rest of physics for you, and I don't know what the thing might be that would make it easier, but there must be something different about it.
We could actually do a whole episode on my thoughts about what's different about electronics. But I think, well, okay, because I feel like I'm like, okay, I'm with you. I got the rules. And then there's quite a lot of experiential knowledge that people are like, oh, everyone knows that then you use a 50 ohm resistor. And I'm like, who knows? Who knew?
Yeah.
Where was that written down? And I find
Where's the list of things that I need to memorize to have that context?
Right. I'm very... And it's a bit like, because I've really struggled with learning languages too. And it's that thing, I'm like, I want it to be a linear process. And when people are like, you just absorb stuff, I'm like, no, I don't like that at all. So
yes,
I think
I can see that. And the rest of physics, well, I again don't know much about physics, but it does seem more linear. You learn this and then you can add this to it. And then, and so in this case, it's suddenly not linear.
And even chemistry makes me a little uncomfortable with that too, because it feels like there's a lot more... Well, I don't even know what the word is for those skills, but it almost seems like muscle memory or something. Like people just kind of experience things and know things, and I'm like, that makes me very anxious. But yeah, with the students, I think I really love your idea of talking to them about what excites them about the subject. And if they're really, and I've definitely had conversations where there is nothing there. But if there is something there, and maybe this isn't the best attitude to say, but sometimes it is like, okay, well then this class is just something you kind of have to endure, but it's because you get to do the thing you like. Or if you're super excited about research, then let's get you signed up for research.
Right.
And then
let's emphasize the parts of the program that you're super into.
Totally.
And that'll hopefully make it worth getting through whatever parts you aren't. That will hopefully, the reason they're part of the major is because hopefully they do fit together and contribute to the part that you do like, that you end up working on, and they give you some context and yada yada. But yes, there's naturally, we all gravitate towards certain aspects of whatever program we're in, and so there's going to be some that you like more than others.
And that's the thing too, like often, especially physics students, don't seem to know that necessarily, that just because you hit the thing you don't like, it doesn't mean all of physics. You know what I mean? It's like that could just be the thing you don't like. So
totally.
Yeah. But I think getting them talking, I think that talking is the main thing. And then what they are excited about. And like we had a student switch to political science years ago, and they were just so anxious that it was like not the practical decision, but it was what they were into. So then it is the practical decision, because it's like, it's not practical to do something you violently dislike.
Totally.
Just so, at the Thanksgiving table when your aunt asks you, you can say you did a practical thing. Like, it's not necessarily... Yeah.
Oh, I love how you framed that.
But it's hard when you see people who are just so miserable in what they're doing, or just struggling so much, and you're like, it doesn't need to be this way. But yeah, so tell me, what are you working on?
Well, very similar. So I like the conversation that I have with the students when I see that they're struggling or whatever, and hopefully we assess, float the idea of whether they do want to change measures, assess what they like about it, all that. But then sometimes, on occasion, I do have a student that, we decide, okay, chemistry is your thing. You are into it, even though we're struggling. We'll try these other things. And they're making it through the major, but they're still struggling, still squeaking by. And I guess what I'm saying is I want all the students to be able to find a major and a career path and all these things that align with them really well. And I sometimes wonder if I didn't intervene enough, if I didn't help enough for them to find the right major, because it seems like they're going to get their chemistry degree, but I am not convinced that they really like it. They've been struggling this whole time. I'm not sure what they want to do with it. And I just wonder if it doesn't seem like a good match, and I wonder if I should have done more than just float the idea they could change the major. But it's hard to know when to do that, because I don't want to push people out of the major if they want the major. For sure, 100% everyone can do chemistry, and I want them to stay if they want to stay. But I'm not, when they've been struggling for so long, and they will graduate, but then what are they going to do with their grades are low, they haven't seemed super excited about it. I'm not sure what they're going to do with it. It makes me question whether I should have done something differently in my advising.
Dude, that's exactly, it's so tricky though. So, when I went to grad school at first, I just fell flat on my face, and I failed the qual. And I remember this professor was like, look, this just clearly isn't for you. And weirdly, he was like, why don't you become a kindergarten teacher? And I was like, I don't think kindergarten teachers are failed physicists. I don't think that's a career, a transition, but whatever. But it was awful, and I was really upset about it. So that's always stuck in my head. Right. And you hear things of people being like, well, you clearly can't cut it. So, that's terrible. But I totally know what you're the minute you're describing, and I'm like, oh my God, I can think of so many students like that. But then, okay, here's something, and I'm going to say this, and I don't know if it's controversial.
Okay.
Can everybody do chemistry? Is that, I know what you're saying, but it's
yeah, I see what you're saying. I still believe the answer is yes, but it takes different way, you might have to change the way you're approaching classes.
Yes.
I'm saying, you might have to change the way you're approaching things, and maybe that change makes it not a good match for you. Maybe you like the concepts, but you really are not into practicing the calculation problems or whatever. And so if you're not into that, then you're also not into chemistry,
Right. Yeah, I think my framing there is not helpful. Well, can they? But it's but sometimes it's yeah.
It's not a good match for everybody,
right.
Obviously.
Yes.
Everybody shouldn't do chemistry. But if you really want to do chemistry, I'm confident you could. But I'm not saying you could just walk in and do it with whatever current tools you have. That it might be that we need, it often happens a lot of the times we have biology majors do great in biology classes and then struggle in chemistry classes. And it's not because they can't do chemistry. It's because the tools that they've learned that serve them well in biology classes are different than the tools they need for chemistry classes. And so we just need to think of the fact that it's a different way to approach the class,
Yes, definitely.
I think so. But again, that doesn't mean that it's a good match for everybody.
Well, it's weird too sometimes, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a primary school teacher, and man, I'm choosing my words carefully here, and I don't want to misrepresent my belief system at all. But she was saying some kids are average, and that's
by
totally
definition.
fine, right? And exactly, and you don't always have to, you know what I mean? And I think I had this person who I talked to who is a physics professor. And one summer, when she was an undergrad, was taking a course in a community college, one of the physics sequence. And there was a guy in her group who was just really wanted to get a C in the class to get into whatever program he was doing. It was chiropractic. And he would always say C for chiropractic. But she used to get so anxious about him because he was not trying his, you know what I mean? He was dude, C for chiropractic. I don't need to do this. But it makes me think professors are generally we were sort of high strung and oh my God, we have to get everything right. So it is so strange to encounter students who are not doing that. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but someone has
to. That's a good point. It's everybody goes out on their own life and does their own things. And So, like, we don't, it's not all about getting an A in our class, obviously, you know? And, yeah, I think that's
But
a really good point.
I think what you're describing is different from what I'm describing. Because, like, I know I've encountered students who are like, I have all these other things in my life that are more important. Not more important, but like, I'm into sports or I'm into this. And this is never going to be my top priority. And they're confident. But then there is the other students who are doing everything they can. And they still are not getting the grades they want to get. And that's
everything.
hard.
Yeah. And in that case, I think everything they can is putting tons of energy in the wrong place.
Yes.
And so we need to find where that misspent energy is going and how we can redirect it to something that's actually towards their goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fascinating, Ruth. This
I feel like we
really
could do this one
about.
like again next week.
Yeah, we totally could. There's lots of
stuff
stuff we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah. And if anyone out there has any advice for those conversations,
I would love to hear
know. Yes.
That'd be great. Contact professorpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you, Ruth.
Cool. Thanks, Claire. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.